So let's go to exactly what the president said, Kristen Holmes, about his plans for after the meeting he's going to have with Vladimir Putin.
I would say the second meeting, if the first one goes okay, we'll have a quick second one. I would like to do it almost immediately, and we'll have a quick second meeting between President Putin and President Zelensky and myself if they'd like to have me there. And that would be a meeting where maybe it could be absolutely work. But the first meeting will not work that out. Certain great things can be gained in the first. It's going to be a very important meeting. But it's setting the table for the second meeting. I think the second meeting, if the second meeting takes place, now there may be no second meeting, because if I feel that it's not appropriate to have it because I didn't get the answers that we have to have, then we're not going to have a second meeting.
Kristen?
So this is the first time we've actually heard him say this about the quick turnaround of the trilateral meeting. I was told this over the weekend from a White House official that there was no world in which President Trump was not going to have a bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. But the question was, when does that next meeting happen? And they were leaving the door open for even potentially having Zelensky go to Alaska for a meeting after this meeting. But there you hear him saying that he's going to call Zelensky right afterwards, the European leaders. Clearly here he has taken a separate tone when it comes to Putin and what he's getting out of this meeting. I mean, you even heard him there couching what he said. Oh, there'll be a third meeting or second meeting if I like what I hear. They're being very careful going into this because President Trump has been embarrassed this time around by Russian President Vladimir Putin. He has time and time again said that Putin wants peace, or I had a good conversation with Putin, only for the Russian president to then go against everything President Trump has said. So now they're being a lot more cautious going into this. And obviously President Trump, they're saying if it goes well, we'll get Zelensky on the phone, potentially have an immediate second meeting.
Yeah, and the president also said that he does, just to your point, still think that Vladimir Putin is targeting civilians in his war against Ukraine, which is one of the many things that President Trump has been very frustrated about after his several calls that he's had with Vladimir Putin, that he feels like he gets nowhere on the phone, which is part of why he wants to meet with him in person.
Yeah, I think for the White House's perspective, it's been kind of 6 months of failure trying to get some movement when it comes to a ceasefire. I think one interesting thing, though, is that you're hearing European leaders and Ukraine's Zelensky try to be on the same accord with the White House before they go into this massive summit. They're trying not to criticize the president. They're trying to say that we're on the same page, that President Trump does want to come out of this with the ceasefire. That was something that came out of the reported call this morning that he had with Ukraine's leader and European leaders, trying to say that they're basically going into this united, making sure that he has the red lines that Europe wants him to have, but also has a latitude to make his own decision. I think that there is certainly a fear from people inside of the government and outside the government that potentially Trump could leave this meeting, and it leads to basically a bad deal for Ukraine. But I think there's also a fear that Trump could leave this meeting, realize Putin is unserious, and then leave the diplomatic conversation altogether.
Yeah. One of the things that the president was asked about at this press conference that he had was about the call that he participated in with European leaders, and included in that was the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Zelensky and the German Chancellor had a press conference afterwards. Let's listen to some of what they said.
Must be at the table at the next meeting. We want things to go in the right sequence. We want a ceasefire at the very beginning, and then a framework agreement must be drawn up.
Everything about Ukraine will be discussed with Ukraine. We have to get prepared for a three-sided format of the conversation. There should be a ceasefire first, then security guarantees, real security guarantees. And by the way, President Trump expressed his support for that.
Hans?
Well, they're not saying different things, right? I mean, you clearly heard from the German chancellor there this idea of an additional meeting. That's what Trump clearly floated in his. I counted 2 to 3 ifs in Trump's sort of conversation about whether or not that meeting would actually take place. So it's pretty clear he's giving himself a lot of hedges. It's very conditional. But the president and President Trump also left on the table, he didn't specify, some sort of negative consequences for Russia and for Vladimir Putin if this meeting doesn't bear the kind of fruit that the president hopes to beat. Now, he preserved his decision space and didn't really enumerate or articulate what those would be, whether it be secondary tariffs, more sanctions, but he's keeping that option on the table.
That was very noteworthy. I totally agree. When the president was asked about whether or not Russia would, or there would be consequences for Russia if Russia fails to deliver really on anything in their meeting on Friday, and his answer was there will be severe consequences, although you're right, he would not get specific.
Right, and we've been talking about these secondary tariffs, and we know that part of the reason that they were put on hold was because they were able to come to this agreement to have the two leaders sit down in Alaska, and that's likely what's on the horizon if something doesn't get worked out. But I also kind of want to talk about your point as well. When you were mentioning, the European leaders really wanting to show that they're on the same page going into this, I think what's so different about this time around versus the last time President Trump met with President Putin is that President Trump seems to have a lot more caution around Putin. So it's not just necessarily the European leaders who are trying to show unity, but we know President Trump has been on a number of phone calls with these various leaders, actually asking for their buy-in at certain points on potential deals that are coming around. He seems to have at least gotten somewhat of the message that these leaders have been trying to send him, and even some of his own team, for years, which is, this is not somebody that you can trust. And now he seems to be reaching out to the greater Europe community to try and get some feedback.
And I just want to add in here that President Trump isn't, and the European leaders, Zelensky, they're not the only ones setting expectations ahead of this. So is the Kremlin. There are several stories that have come out in the last day or two out of Russia. Kremlin's war goals remain unchanged, says Russia's foreign ministry. Russia's foreign ministry pours cold water on the idea of territory swapping. Russia dismisses European consultations ahead of Trump-Putin summit as, quote, insignificant.
Yeah, and I've been talking to quite a few people really vested in this Russia issue ahead of the Alaska trip, and they basically been telling me that the burden is on President Putin to show, at least to Donald Trump, that it's not going to be like the last 6 months, and that there can be some changes made, even though I think Russia believes that they're about to break through multiple offensives in Ukraine and that they have the upper hand when it comes to the battleground in the field there. And so it's going to be up to Putin to show Donald Trump that basically they are friends, that he is the Putin that he was back in the first term, and that he can trust him. And I think for the White House, the way that President Trump is going to enter the room is that, he has to be basically cognizant that that is the way that President Putin may try to play it.